Do you like alchemy? If so, you surely must know the Perserod family, known as the oldest, most mysterious, and sinister lineage of alchemists the world has ever known. In their obsession with understanding the laws of the universe and achieving divinity through the flesh, these alchemists went mad and spread biochemical disasters throughout the land. For example, the time when a biomechanical dragon destroyed a city, or when a red, monstrous creature, a twisted fruit of experiments that violated life itself, tore the flesh of everyone it encountered. There was also the time when a giant insect possessed some humans, turning them into zombies. However, 300 years ago, for reasons that time hasn't explained, this family began to crumble. It was then that Isao Perserod emerged, proclaiming himself the last worthy heir of the lineage and the greatest alchemist of the century. He vowed to restore the family's glory by creating biochemical weapons as powerful as the gods themselves. At that very moment, he claimed that his greatest creation, called Final Calamity, was about to be completed after 400 days of incessant work. He then turned to his assistant, the Filthy Rat, and ordered him to begin the final stage of the process, instructing him to monitor the purity of the azoth fluid, warning that it should never fall below 70%. The assistant Cheese, his first assistant of biochemical modification, huffed and reminded him that he had already asked several times not to be called that way. Cheese then reported that the purity of the azoth was at 99%, and that the test subject's vital signs remained stable. He reported that the heart rate was 15 per minute, the temperature was 25 degrees Celsius, and everything remained within parameters on the monitor. Isao ordered the addition of 52 grams of black sulfur to the tank, saying it would eliminate impurities and harmful bacteria in the test subject's body. Isao then ordered the addition of 160 grams of white mercury, saying it would stabilize the test subject's primary personality, and Cheese confirmed the procedure, reporting that the azoth purity had dropped to 85%, although the vital signs were still stable. Next, Isao commanded the introduction of 366 grams of yellow salt, with the intention of completely remodeling the test subject's soul. And once again, the assistant executed the order and reported that the fluid purity had fallen to 72%. With the purity dangerously close to the limit, Isao announced that the time for the final step of the process had arrived. He ordered the complete drainage of the azoth, the depressurization of the system, and the preparation to open the containment tank. Without hesitation, Cheese pulled a large lever, leaving the tank officially open. Then, the hatches opened slowly, releasing a thick mist. With a maniacal smile on his lips, Isao held up some of his blueprints and proclaimed that his masterpiece was complete, stating that the final calamity, a biochemical experiment capable of destroying the world, was now real and stood before them. Our protagonist then held the project sketch in his hands, which showed an immense biomechanical creature, forged to conquer and annihilate. Raising his arms, he shouted to his creation to take its terrible form and dominate the world. But amidst the smoke, what emerged was a delicate barefoot foot gently touching the platform. Soon, a figure began to emerge as the mist slowly receded. Finally, the smoke dissipated completely, revealing a blonde woman, extremely hot, pardon the language. That sight paralyzed Isao. With eyes wide and mouth agape, he could only scream, asking what the hell that was. Still in shock, Isao declared he needed to see it up close, but his assistant tried to intervene, warning that direct contact went against the biochemical safety protocol. Ignoring the warning, he ordered the assistant to shut up and advanced. Now, standing before his creation, he stared up at her, while she remained with her eyes still closed. With his hand on his chin, he began to wonder if that feminine form was merely a disguise, an imitation of the true final calamity, and he speculated that perhaps those breasts weren't even real, but rather energy containers, holding immense power within them. Then, to test it, he extended his index finger towards her bust. Upon touching, he analyzed the sensation and the softness under his fingers. Then, he recoiled in horror, pulling his own hair and screaming that his creation was just an ordinary human. Desperate, he grabbed her, asking where the left arm of the Angel of Extinction that he had transplanted there was. Next, he approached her face, questioning about the sad eye of the Emerald Empress that he had grafted. And finally, he pressed his ear against her chest, demanding to know why he couldn't hear the perpetual mechanical heart that he had implanted. Suddenly, the creation's eyes opened, emanating an intense aura that threatened everything around. In the same instant, Cheese screamed desperately, imploring Isao to be careful. Our hero looked up, confused. But before he could react, the woman grabbed him and threw him violently against the ground, beginning to bite his neck violently. With tears in his eyes, Cheese was already saying his goodbyes, telling Isao not to worry, as he would inherit the Perserod family legacy, and mentioned what he would write on his tombstone. The last head of the Perserod family, president of the Society of Pure Research, the alchemist genius who was not killed by the heroes of the city, but died at the hands of his own test subject, and a pitiful 15-year-old virgin. Fallen on the ground, Isao gritted his teeth and threatened the assistant, calling him filthy rat and vowing to fill his cheese stash with worm eggs as soon as he could. At this, the poor fellow, offended, complained about his master being so cruel even at a time like this. Meanwhile, a broken vial on the floor was leaking a red liquid, labeled experimental blood of mutant fire slug. Even pinned beneath the woman, our protagonist scoffed, saying that he, Isao Perserod, the greatest alchemist genius of the century, would never be killed by his creation, and reminded the rat that he had added his manifested soul extract to the final calamity's fluid, which made her soul naturally bound to his and incapable of harming him. Surprised, yet unconvinced, Cheese said he didn't recall adding his soul extract. And well, it's time for a flashback. Shortly before all this happened, there was Isao in a mask, scolding Cheese for drinking again. He ordered the assistant to stop and help him add a component to the final calamity fluid, warning him not to spill any. Then, Cheese, still half drunk, held the small vial Isao handed him, asked what it was, and commented that it smelled nice. So, the crazy rat, thinking the soul extract would improve the taste, poured it into his own wine bottle. Back in the present, Cheese brought his hands to his head, realizing the catastrophic mistake he had made. Still pinned, Isao ordered Final Calamity to get off him, reminding her that he was her master and demanding that she behave. Suddenly, she began to move closer to his mouth, and Isao, breaking out in a cold sweat, asked what she was doing. She then began to slowly run her tongue over his lips. At this, Isao took critical damage and turned completely red. Right after, she began licking his cheeks, leaving him even closer to erupting. But regaining control for an instant, he forcefully pushed her away. And he backed away, shouting that he had been exposed, and ordering in a panic the filthy rat to bring him the purification spray immediately. Without wasting time, he ran to a nearby control panel and forcefully pressed the green button. Immediately, a containment system was activated, and a jet of steam began to spray from a device in the ceiling onto the experiment, who looked up, confused. Then, a cylindrical crystal wall descended rapidly, trapping her. She pressed her hands against the barrier, which was made of high-frequency, self-illuminating crystal resistant to impact, corrosion, and magic with adjustable permeability. Meanwhile, Isao, in a panic, desperately sprayed 2 vials of purifying spray on himself. But suddenly, he stopped and realized something. Quickly, he ran to a cabinet and began rummaging through piles of files, while Cheese, intrigued, asked what he was looking for. Shortly after, Isao pulled out a file, exclaiming that he had found it. The document showed a photo of a purple-haired girl, identified as the original experimental body of the final calamity. He then confirmed, as he had suspected, that the blonde woman he had created was the original test subject, Human 2252. At this, the rat's eyes widened, recognizing her as the girl they had rescued a year before, almost dead, armless, and legless. And he said he had found her face familiar from the start. Even so, he soon frowned, assistant, remembering that 2252 had purple hair, and asked why she was blonde now. Isao agreed, saying that was the crux of the matter, and also noted that her personality seemed to have changed significantly too. And, well, a year ago, on a sunny day, at the bustling White Queen Bank in the Golden City, many beings were going about their lives normally. That day, hidden in a ventilation duct, a device was emitting constant beeps. Inside the device, a green liquid bubbled while a digital timer showed only 3 seconds remaining, until the counter hit 0, and the device released smoke through the vents. Meanwhile, in the men's restroom of the bank, our hero and his faithful rat assistant were pissing at the urinals while whistling. The rat then commented that the dragon spider toxin must have already been released, and Isao, with a malicious smile, simply confirmed. Then, he slowly unzipped his long coat, revealing that both he and Cheese were carrying weapons hidden beneath their clothes. Weapons in hand, Isao and Cheese prepared for action, and outside the restroom, everyone present there was sound asleep due to the gas. As they moved through the now silent bank, one of the security guards, still conscious, confronted them, asking who they were and how they dared to rob the White Queen Bank, questioning if they had any idea who the owner was. But without paying much attention, Isao replied that he wasn't the least bit interested and fired his weapon at the guard. The security guard then dissolved, transforming into a slime on the floor. With a faint smile beneath his mask, Isao commented that the guard looked much cuter that way. Shortly after, as Cheese approached a mother and her child, the woman pleaded for them to take whatever they wanted, but not to kill them. At that moment, the rat noticed the lollipop in the child's hand and commented that it was his favorite. Without hesitation, he demanded the candy, snatching it from the frightened little boy's hands. With the child crying in the background, Cheese savored the lollipop, confirming it was indeed strawberry milk flavor, just as the child had said. Next, our hero flipped the sign on the establishment's door, leaving it showing "Closed for business." Shortly after, he barred the door with a heavy metal rod, ensuring no one could get in or out. Meanwhile, Cheese used his large weapon to melt the lock on a reinforced door. Isao then took out an electronic device, preparing for the next step, and with a click, a deafening explosion ripped through the bank's interior, destroying the reinforced door and opening the way to the vault. Then, a shower of banknotes rained down on Isao and Cheese, who found themselves before a mountain of piled-up money, and amidst the fortune, the two celebrated with a fist bump. And so, under the cloak of the starry night, they completed another crime, leaving their mark on the city while the crescent moon witnessed their actions. A short time later, Isao and Cheese walked cheerfully down the street, carrying the bags full of money. Our protagonist boasted, saying the robbery was perfect, worthy of the most evil criminal alchemist genius of the Golden City. And excited, the rat suggested they go to the Black Lion bar to celebrate with girls and drinks all night long. But Isao immediately shut down the assistant's enthusiasm, recalling that last time they spent a quarter of the stolen money on alcohol and ugly, heavily made-up women, and decreed that this time every penny would go towards the final calamity experiment. The alchemist then tried to cheer him up, painting a glorious future. He explained that as soon as the final calamity was successfully created, the Golden City would become their playground. Thus, when they revealed their identity, the Perserod family would be famous throughout the world, and he stated that, in this future, Cheese could do whatever he pleased. Soon, the rat placed a hand on his chin and agreed, getting carried away with the idea, imagining the mayor personally serving him drinks, forcing the heroes of the city to wear diapers, suck on pacifiers, and dance in the main square. At this, the two burst into laughter, sharing the same vision of a chaotic and fun future under their dominion. However, a sharp sound suddenly cut through their lighthearted mood, making Cheese duck instinctively, startled, and ask if the shot came from the Department of Security inspection. Isao, more observant, immediately denied it, saying that sound was too heavy, pondering it might be a large-caliber revolver. Then the smoke from the revolver dissipated in the wind, and the figure of Homeier emerged from the shadows, a gray-haired man, with a piercing gaze and a pipe held firmly between his lips. Director of the Lighthouse District branch, he was known as the hero of the Golden City, the feared gentleman of of bullets. As he walked calmly, an extremely wounded, purple-haired woman crawled on the cold ground of the alley. Hidden, Cheese recognized the old man, complaining that Homeier, instead of pursuing them for the robbery in his own district's bank, was here dealing with the cripple. But our hero told him to shut up and pay attention to what the man would say. The gentleman of bullets then recognized her as a member of the Hellhound unit and said that, even wounded, she had killed 5 of his best detectives. But he stated that at that moment, she could only crawl like a dog, and he demanded to know where the unit's kill list was, and he promised to spare her if she cooperated. After all, he styled himself a gentleman. At this, the woman merely watched him. The old man then slapped his own forehead, remembering that, due to operational secrecy, all members of that unit had their vocal cords removed and only communicated via a special sign language, and mocked, saying they were a pathetic bunch. Suddenly, with her remaining hand, she tried to reach for something hidden beneath her clothes, but Homeier was faster and drove a sharp blade through her hand, pinning it to the ground. He commented that it was impressive how she still thought of fighting back in that situation. But suddenly, his gaze was drawn to an old teddy bear, stained with blood, lying nearby. He picked it up, intrigued, and wondered if the aforementioned list was hidden inside the tattered teddy bear. At that moment, the woman pulled the blade from her hand and let out a scream of pain and fury. But mercilessly, the gentleman struck her on the head with the heavy butt of his weapon. He then stepped on her head, holding the teddy bear, and noted that the toy seemed to be very important to her. Sarcastically, the jerk said he would give the teddy bear back to her, throwing it on the ground before her. But before she could muster any reaction, he sliced the teddy bear in half with his sharp blade. At this, she began to scream in despair, her grief echoing through the entire city alley. The old man then said that, even without the list, taking her body would still yield him a reward from the adults, even if it was slightly smaller. At that moment, a voice emerged from the shadows, and Isao commented, ironically, that no one would imagine Homeier, the altruistic hero and nemesis of criminals, was actually a greedy man. Surprised, he spun around quickly, demanding to know who was there while aiming his weapon. Our hero then formally introduced himself, declaring himself the most evil criminal in the Golden City and the greatest alchemist of the century, revealing his name, Isao, the Baron. And while Cheese coughed, he introduced his companion as his right-hand man, the Mad Rat Doctor. But the rat, offended, corrected him immediately, and said he was his criminal partner, equal in all things, demanding to be called by his full name, the mysterious and Mad Rat Doctor. Isao found the repetition of mad ridiculous, but Cheese dug his heels in, saying he liked it that way and that it made them more stylish. The old man, impatient, cut the argument short, saying he didn't have time for nonsense. At this, Isao whispered that he thought the old man was underestimating them and suggested his assistant show their results. Then the two threw the money bags on the ground, which made the old man observe them more carefully and soon realize that the two were, in fact, the thieves from the White Queen Bank. Full of pride, Isao and Cheese struck cool poses. Then, the gentleman of bullets scoffed and said that showing off about crimes was something insecure amateurs do, and that criminals like that never last long. He commented that he hated wasting ammunition on trash, but he would make an exception. And as a gentleman, he gave them 3 seconds to run. But Isao smiled, refused the offer, and asked him to shoot. After all, he wanted to see with his own eyes the legendary shot of the Golden City's greatest shooter. Homeier accepted the challenge, ready to satisfy the alchemist's desire. But his finger froze on the trigger. Confused, he tried to force it, wondering why he couldn't fire. A cold sweat trickled down his forehead. The weapon, previously light, seemed to weigh a ton in his hands, and powerless, he fell to his knees, supporting himself with the revolver's barrel on the ground. His gaze then fell upon the money bags, noticing the faint smoke emanating from them. Our protagonist then said he had noticed too late, and explained that the bags released a neuromuscular interference gas that poisoned humans within seconds, adding that he had already been inhaling the gas for over a minute. Fallen and weakened, the old man asked Isao's purpose, questioning if he was there to save the wounded woman. Soon, the alchemist laughed at the suggestion, saying they were villains, not heroes, stating that they simply didn't like the heroes of the city. With that said, he fired his weapon at the fallen old man, turning the gentleman of bullets into a green slime with a mustache. At this, Cheese commented that not even those with the Silver Hero license were good enough, and suggested to Isao that they clean up the scene and head back to base to have some fun. However, seeing Isao crouched near the wounded woman, the rat asked what he was doing, but our hero replied that he was just observing, trying to see how much longer she could survive. With a clinical gaze, he listed her injuries, which included left arm and leg amputated, festering wounds, right palm pierced by a bullet, nearly all ribs broken, right eye gouged out, fingernails torn off, vocal cords deliberately burned, and a failing heart. And using a device, he also detected at least 4 potent toxins in her bloodstream. Isao commented that it was a miracle she was still alive, and wondered what was so special about her, as the Department of Inspection wouldn't be so cruel to an ordinary person. Cheese, however, was getting impatient, and said she wouldn't survive much longer, insisting they should head back to the base to have fun, as that was the most important thing to do. But soon, he asked suspiciously if Isao was thinking of saving her. Annoyed, the boy stood up abruptly, finding the notion of being called a hero absurd, saying he was the city's most evil villain, and saving someone made absolutely no sense. Cheese, relieved, commented that he had scared him, but Isao interrupted him, telling him to stop talking and that they should leave immediately. However, as he turned to leave, he noticed the wounded woman was still trying to drag herself along the ground, and wondered what more she could possibly do in her condition. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. After all, people died in alleys like that every day. But then, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the alley, and a heavy rain began to fall. Isao and Cheese walked away under their umbrellas, stating that the rain would wash away the city's sins and blood, and that everything would be forgotten once it stopped. But the woman, still on the ground, felt the cold drops on her injured face, and saw the pieces of her teddy bear being swept away by the stream forming on the ground. She lay there, alone in the vast emptiness of the alley, utterly abandoned, as the rain attempted to wash her wounds clean. Even so, with her remaining strength, she dragged herself forward and began gathering the pieces of the teddy bear, and a faint smile touched her lips as she clutched the remnants of her toy. Then she accepted her fate and curled up, ready to move on to the next life. At that very moment, Isao's foot stopped right next to her head, and there he stood, regretting his decision, and now determined to help her. A short time later, now in the operating room of the Nightmare's Nest, Cheese, sweating, asked Isao if he realized what they were doing right now, and with a scalpel in hand, our hero replied that they were operating, but the rat, impatient, yelled that they were saving a life, and that was absurd. He questioned when Isao had picked up this terrible habit of saving lives, asking if he had forgotten their objective, but our hero denied it, reaffirming that they would become the most evil villains and make the world witness the terror and greatness of the Perserod family. However, he explained that to achieve this, they needed to create a bioweapon powerful enough to destroy the world and surpass the gods, namely, the final calamity. For this, he elaborated that the host needed to embody all extreme negative emotions, pain, sorrow, anger, and despair. But the most crucial part was possessing a trace of the purest kindness deep within their soul. He emphasized that this final trace of kindness was the key to making the creation controllable, and revealed that thousands of prior experiments had failed because the hosts lacked this final component, and concluded that this woman fulfilled all the necessary conditions. But Cheese pointed out that the girl was severely injured and could die at any moment. Isao agreed, and urgently declared that they needed to conduct the final calamity experiment as quickly as possible. He then divided the tasks. Cheese would prepare the transplant materials, while he would prepare the blood of the cocoon of despair. The preparations then began. The withered left arm of the Angel of Embers was removed from its cryogenic container. The painful right eye of the Emerald Empress floated in its preservation fluid, and the infinite modified model artificial heart waited, ready for implantation, while the corroded fetal blood of the cocoon of despair bubbled in its heated tank. Before the operating table, Isao and Cheese readied themselves. Our hero declared it was time to begin and create a miracle. And so, after that whole story of Human 2252, we finally returned to the present. Then our hero stuck the file onto the container where the blonde woman was located. Cheese asked what they would do, and Isao, hand on his chin, replied that the next morning they would begin the routine of observation, cultivation, and testing. The rat then questioned what would happen if the girl turned out to be a failure. Coldly, he replied that they would simply get rid of her, and stated that he wouldn't keep a failure by his side. A short time later, in our alchemist's room, he slept peacefully in his bed, but his rest was interrupted by a vivid memory, the sensation of his creation's tongue on his lips. With that, he began to toss and turn in bed, disturbed, and soon sat up, frustrated, wondering why the hell he couldn't sleep. Instinctively, he touched his own lips, and decisively, he got up, thinking that, despite the tank's reinforced walls, it wouldn't hurt to check. Then, our hero walked down the silent corridor towards the laboratory, where upon arriving, he found the blonde woman huddled in the corner of the tank, hugging her knees. At first glance, she seemed quiet, which led him to think he could finally relax. However, observing her more closely, he noticed her body was trembling. Faced with this, he brought his hand to his chin and began to wonder if, by chance, the dreaded final calamity was afraid of sleeping alone. Still, he dismissed the idea, reminding himself it wasn't his business. After all, she was just a test subject. But as he turned to leave, he stopped abruptly. The image of the trembling girl and the memory of that kiss left him uneasy. He then sighed and approached the control panel, pressing the red button to open the tank. Slowly, the crystal barrier began to rise. Then, he invited the final calamity to come out, saying he would take her to a nice place to sleep. Surprised, the blonde's expression changed, her face blushing. Soon after, Isao led her through the Level 7 high-risk experimental subject observation area. There, monstrous creatures were kept in reinforced tanks. From inside one of the cells, experimental subject number 8, a 1,000-meter wild dragon, roared, promising to swallow our hero whole as soon as it broke free. Next to it, experimental subject number 15, the abyssal eye, projected its thoughts, vowing to see through Isao's soul and torment him eternally. However, our hero ignored them and pointed to an empty space between the two tanks, telling the blonde that, among all the high-risk subjects, number 8 and number 15 were the most cheerful, and suggested that if she stayed there between them, she wouldn't feel scared anymore. Terrified, the girl pressed her hands against the invisible wall of her new compartment, horrified by her new neighbors. While the dragon screamed for Isao to release it, and the abyssal eye threatened to devour his soul, our hero simply yawned and told the two monsters to get along as he was going to sleep. Back in the comfort of his bed, he sat up cheerfully, commenting that the final calamity wouldn't be alone anymore. Then, he finally threw himself onto the blanket, saying he could finally get a good night's sleep. Meanwhile, in the containment area, the wild dragon turned to the abyssal eye, questioning why that human girl was there in the detention zone for powerful creatures like them. The abyssal eye replied that it didn't know, but remembered hearing the damn Isao call the girl final calamity. At this, the dragon burst into laughter, finding it ridiculous that this tiny human, comparable to an ant, could be his final weapon. The eye had the same reaction, commenting that Isao's final calamity experiments had already failed over 1,000 times, and although he had managed to create some frightening creatures in the past, managing only a human this time was humiliating. While the monsters mocked, the poor girl began to pound forcefully on the crystal wall. Seeing this, the dragon told her not to bother, as not even he, in his berserk form, could break that high-frequency crystal wall, but made a proposal. If she managed to break it, he would become her mount. The Abyssal Eye also joined the bet, saying that not even its most powerful magic energy beam could penetrate the barrier, let alone a weak human like her, and promised to become her pet if she accomplished the feat. Hearing the provocations, the girl stopped hitting the wall. Suddenly, a crackling red energy began to surge in her arm. It intensified rapidly, transforming her hand into a demonic claw, emanating terrifying power. At this, the neighboring monster's eyes widened, shocked by what they saw. Without hesitation, she punched the crystal wall with her new hand, and the impact began to melt the glass. The dragon, seeing the force of the blow, asked what kind of trick that was. With a crash, the crystal wall shattered completely while simultaneously melting. The girl then looked at what she had done, confused, as drops of molten crystal dripped from the ceiling, and began to stare at her own hand. Agape, the dragon, looked at the small human who had just destroyed the indestructible wall. The Abyssal Eye had the same reaction, equally stunned by the display of power. Quickly, the dragon bowed its immense head as a sign of respect, imploring the girl to accept its reverence, offering to be her mount from then on, and asking for help to melt its crystal wall, too. The Abyssal Eye bent its tentacles and declared it would be her pet, begging her to free it as well. Meanwhile, far away in his room, Isao and Cheese slept soundly, completely unaware of what was happening in the sub-levels of their home. Suddenly, a deafening alarm, accompanied by flashing red lights, echoed through the base, waking our hero with a jump. Startled, he ran and found Cheese already on his feet. Asked about the alarm, realizing it was level 4. The rat explained that 3 barriers had fallen and that they needed to contain the subjects before it got worse. Without wasting time, the two rushed to the elevator, descending towards the chaos as the alarm continued to blare. On the way, the rat checked the device and said the escapees were number 8, the Wild Dragon, and number 15, the Abyssal Eye, but found the breach of F203 strange, as that cell should have been empty. Upon hearing about F203, Isao became alert and demanded to see the device immediately. On the screen, a recording showed the blonde destroying the crystal wall with her demonic arm. Shocked, our alchemist exclaimed that she had manifested the transplanted left arm. Furious, Cheese demanded an explanation of how the final calamity had been moved to the high-risk subject observation area. It's then that they finally arrived on the floor where all the commotion was happening. As soon as the elevator doors opened, the two hurried out and were faced with a chaotic scene. The Wild Dragon and the Abyssal Eye were free from their cells, attacking every structure they encountered. With a stern look, Isao faced the two monsters and commented that they must have had enough fun already. The Wild Dragon snarled in response, while the Abyssal Eye just stared at him. Soon, the beast shouted, calling him damned for imprisoning it for so long like a lab rat, and swore to show him the consequences of his actions. But before it could attack, Cheese fired his weapon and hit the dragon with a projectile that released a yellowish smoke around it. Surprised, the monster asked what that was. Soon, our hero explained that it was a grenade containing over 200 dragon spider eggs. He then questioned, with an intimidating look, if the dragon, being one, knew what dragon spiders were. And horrified, the monster described the parasites that lived on and fed off dragons, condemning the host to certain death, which was immediately confirmed by the jerk, our protagonist. While Isao's attention was focused on the dragon, the Abyssal Eye prepared a sneak attack, planning to use its magic energy beam to dissolve the alchemist. However, in the same instant, a grenade was thrown towards it. The monster was confused by the sudden attack, and the grenade exploded in an intense flash, engulfing the monster. Fallen on the ground and writhing, the eye screamed that it was going blind and cursed Isao. With both monsters incapacitated, our hero asked if they would continue the mess or return to their cages. But the Wild Dragon replied that he couldn't make them surrender because they had the final calamity on their side. The Abyssal Eye agreed, saying that Big Sis could melt the toughest crystal walls instantly, claiming that Isao wouldn't stand a chance against her. It's then that the blonde appeared and began walking calmly towards them. Worried, he started thinking that if she lost control, the situation would become really problematic. And noticing Isao's tension, the dragon mocked, saying it had been a long time since he'd seen him show fear. Then he turned to the blonde, lowered his head, and begged her to avenge them against Isao, the damned one who locked them up and used them as test subjects. At this, the blonde continued advancing. Aghast, Cheese yelled at Isao, asking if he didn't have an emergency protocol to suppress the final calamity. But our hero replied that theoretically, no material or method existed that could contain her completely. Then she stomped hard on the ground and launched herself towards him with surprising speed. Our hero could only take a step back, and in an instant, she tackled him to the ground while Cheese, in the background, screamed his master's name. Seeing Isao subdued, the wild dragon mocked, saying there was still time to beg, and that if he cleaned its spider eggs and licked its claws, perhaps it would ask Big Sis to let him live, and warned him not to wait too long, as she could take his life at any moment. However, to the monster's surprise, instead of attacking Isao, once again she began licking his face, furious. Our alchemist pushed her face away, asking if she was done yet, but the girl continued salivating while looking at him. Annoyed, our hero brought his hand to his forehead and said he understood, proposing to take her somewhere else. Right after, he pushed her away, telling her to stop licking him, asking if she was a dog. But before they left, the wild dragon asked Big Sis what move she used to melt the crystal. At this, Isao stood up with a dark look and walked towards the two, asking sarcastically how he should thank them for making the final calamity destroy everything and lose his sleep. Shortly after, the elevator ascended. Inside it, the silly blonde pressed random buttons, taking them to every floor of the mansion. Meanwhile, Isao and Cheese were almost falling asleep on their feet. Suddenly, the panel flashed and began descending uncontrollably, making Isao scream for her to stop. Back in Containment, the wild dragon complained about the ridiculous green suit and said he couldn't show up in the high-risk wing looking like that. The Abyssal Eye, now surrounded by onions, cried and begged for them to take everything away. Meanwhile, in another tank, some Hydra hatchlings slept peacefully, until suddenly, one of them slowly opened an eye, and upon seeing the calamity pressing her cheeks against the tank, they all woke up startled. The girl pressed her hand against the glass, fascinated by the aquatic creatures. Meanwhile, Isao commented that the final calamity refused to sleep in the lab and the high-risk area, questioning where she should spend the night. It's then that Cheese, sprawled on the sofa, offered a simple solution, and pointing at him, suggested the girl sleep in his room. Indignant, our hero asked how he could possibly leave a test subject in his own room. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the base, a monitor displayed the failing transmission from Detective S682 at the Golden Poppy Hotel. He reported image loss, requested urgent restoration, and mentioned strange interference. The screen flickered non-stop as an attempt to restart the camera was made, until amidst a purple distortion, it managed to partially restore the image. The camera revealed a hotel corridor covered in bodies and skeletons, stained with blood, which made him question what had happened there. It's then that, approaching a skeleton, the investigator commented on the missing flesh, leaving only bones, wondering what terrible monster could have done that. Suddenly, S682 began to cough, making the other agent ask what was wrong with him. He looked at his hand, noticing his blood was now purple, and realized he had been poisoned. It was then that footsteps were heard at the door, and a voice announced that the new food had arrived. The agent instantly paled, stammering as he recognized the figure. It was a monster. At this, a sinister female figure with black wings and torn clothes appeared, and suddenly, the agent was swallowed by the busty woman's pet. "Goodbye, S682, we will miss you." Soon, communication was cut, and the monitor displayed only static, while the base tried in vain to call for him. And well, that girl was simply high-risk experimental subject number 0 inches, biological code unknown. A warning from Isao was displayed, reminding that when monitoring Subject 0, it was mandatory to wear the Q4 chemical suit from the Society of Pure Research and never remove it, no matter how tempting. Back in the room, the rat explained his logic, saying that the disaster girl only seemed to feel close to Isao and it would be safer to keep her nearby, Otherwise, she might cause trouble elsewhere. Isao scoffed, stating it was obvious, since his soul extract created an affinity with her, but Cheese interrupted him, explaining that he had drunk the extract himself, thinking it was wine. Shocked, Isao yelled for the rat to repeat what he had said, while Cheese defended himself, accusing Isao of ordering everything while drunk, further stating that the extract smelled like fine wine. Desperate, our hero grabbed the rat and shouted that they no longer had any guarantee if the disaster girl got out of control. But at the same time he was being choked, Cheese pointed to the calamity cheerfully entering the hydra pond. Soon, he turned and kept his eyes fixed on the disaster girl, who dived headfirst into the hydra tank with her bottom up. Desperate, Isao shouted that Xiaozhou wasn't a toy and ordered her to get out of there. But since she ignored him, the alchemist, red with anger, grabbed her feet and pulled her forcefully out of the tank. Soon, Xiaozhou emerged from the tank, confused, wondering who was pulling her, and with the force, our hero fell headfirst onto the floor. However, something even more immense fell on top of him. Soon, his soul began to leave his body. Isao now found himself with two immense cushions on his face. Suffocated, our hero pushed the disaster girl's hip, yelled that she was an idiot, and asked if she had any idea how much weight she carried, telling her to get off him. In the background, Cheese laughed heartily at his master's ridiculous situation. Then, standing and still red, our hero forbade the disaster girl from returning to the hydra tank. Cheese tried to leave, saying the disaster girl was all his and he was going to sleep, but our hero reacted indignantly, asking why the rat, who wasn't even going to sleep, was passing all the responsibility to him. Soon, he turned and warned that the disaster girl was just a delicate girl and that our hero should treat her carefully, as the consequences of her fury would be unimaginable. Our hero questioned the term delicate girl, reminded him she was just a test subject, and asked what the rat meant by gentle. At that instant, the blonde sneezed forcefully from having soaked her head in the water. She then looked at him like a puppy begging for food, completely drenched. At this, our alchemist sighed and suggested she take a bath before moving on. A short time later, already in the bathroom, the poor fellow began filling the bathtub with water, and meanwhile, used a device to scan the girl's body, warning her not to touch anything. The device indicated no pathogens. Even so, he brought his hand to his forehead, frustrated, complaining that he didn't want a test subject using his bathtub. Soon, he pointed to the bathtub and asked her to take a bath after he left, but the silly blonde seemed not to understand, which made him put his hand to his forehead once more. Then, he explained again, but very slowly, stating that when he left, she should take off her clothes, go to the bathtub and take a bath. After speaking like a baboon, he asked if she had understood, and she promptly confirmed. But something told me she had misunderstood, because in the same instant, she began undressing in front of him. Our hero turned red with embarrassment, but in the same instant, he stopped and questioned why he felt that way. After all, for a great alchemist, test subjects had no gender, and he should view this objectively. But as soon as she took off her top, the shine of his creation's large melons blinded our protagonist, causing an instant nosebleed. He fell unconscious to the floor, while the girl, now naked in the tub, screamed in fright. A short time later, our hero picked up the shower head, put 2 pieces of tissue in his nose to stop the bleeding, and put on sunglasses to hide his shame. Already resigned to the situation, our hero complained that, in the end, he would end up bathing this problematic creature with his own hands. Then, he scooped up some water, a little shampoo, and began lathering her head. Soon, the poor fellow warned her not to open her eyes while he was applying the product. Next, he asked her to tilt her head back, and with her eyes closed due to the water, the disaster girl obeyed without hesitation. Observing her, our hero blushed slightly and admitted her appearance was quite deceiving. Soon, our hero turned off the shower head and placed it back in its holder. Turning around, Isao threw a towel at her, warning that he wasn't her maid and she would have to dry herself. Then, he discarded the nose tissues and sunglasses, muttering that even if she was a calamity, he wouldn't take care of her. However, However, as he turned to leave, our hero stepped on a bar of soap. With that, he lost his balance and fell into the bathtub, splashing water everywhere. Now sitting next to her in the tub, our hero complained that it hurt too much, and meanwhile, thought irritably that he should take her straight to the sterilization room and use a high-pressure water gun on her. Hearing his grumbles, the disaster girl looked at him, worried. With that, she moved closer to him, pressing her body against his as if gesturing to stop him from committing such barbarity. At that exact moment, Cheese opened the bathroom door, holding a leash and announcing he had found it, in case Isao was worried about an attack from the final calamity. However, upon seeing the two together in the bathtub, he stopped abruptly, and with a mischievous smile, the rat told them to carry on, slowly closing the door. Isao, indignant, shouted that it wasn't what the rat was thinking at all, and slammed the door shut. But seconds later, he opened a crack and suggested that if Isao was going to do that with a high-risk test subject, it would be better to wear a protective suit. Furious, our alchemist threw the soap at the door, telling the rat to get lost. Outside, leaning against the door, Cheese commented that Isao's alchemy skills were truly impressive, even though he was just a virgin, and looking at a picture on the wall, he murmured that the master could rest assured, as our hero's preferences were perfectly normal. Meanwhile, back in the bathroom, Isao, while continuing to grumble, dried the disaster girl's hair with a towel. Next, he opened a drawer and took out a hairdryer, and upon pointing it at her, the blonde got startled. After all, the nozzle of the device strongly resembled the muzzle of a firearm. This brought back the image of the gentleman of bullets pointing a gun at the disaster girl in that dark alley. And as the memory flooded her mind, she became even more terrified. At the same time, our hero lowered the hairdryer and asked her to stay still while he dried her hair. But in a matter of seconds, our hero realized the disaster girl was no longer there and panicked. Soon, he spotted her silhouette behind the shower curtain. This made him wonder what the hell she was up to. Without hesitation, he reached towards the curtain and pulled it forcefully aside. Irritated, he ordered her to stop playing around and asked if she had any idea what time it was. But upon opening it, he found the poor girl huddled in the corner, trembling with fear. Seeing that, he found her reaction strange, wondering what had frightened her so much, since she hadn't shown fear even before the chaotic dragon or the abyssal eye. Suddenly, he remembered the hairdryer and had an epiphany. Then he noted that the hairdryer resembled a gun and concluded that this triggered memories of when she had been hunted by the gentleman of bullets, showing that parts of her previous personality and memories still existed. Sighing, he grumbled about what a problematic test subject she was. The girl remained huddled, trembling. Then Isao called her name, which made her look up. At the same time, he showed the hairdryer again, but this made her panic again and shrink back, covering her head with her hands. But to show it wasn't dangerous, Isao pressed the button, and the hairdryer's fan started spinning, producing warm air. Curious, she peeked out from between her arms, while our hero smiled gently, directing the air towards his own hair, showing it was harmless. Soon, she removed her hands from her head, and her expression of fear transformed into understanding, making her break into a radiant smile. A short time later, turning it on and off, the calamity now played with the hairdryer by herself, messing up all her hair with the wind, which left our hero extremely irritated, thinking that if he had known this would happen, he would have let her remain afraid of the hairdryer. 20 minutes later, Isao couldn't take it anymore, and furious, took the hairdryer from her, complaining that he didn't go to the trouble of creating her just so she could play around late into the night. At this, the poor girl tried to appeal with cuteness, approaching him with a pleading look, but our alchemist didn't fall for it, stating that acting that way wouldn't work, and soon put the hairdryer away in the drawer, locking it afterwards. Turning to her with the key in hand, he warned that if she behaved, he would let her play with the hairdryer in the future, but for now, she should go to sleep immediately. Disappointed, the experiment lowered her head, and with that, our hero brought his hands to his face, confirming that from that day on, his peace would be stolen. As the calamity yawned, our hero wondered where the hell she should sleep that night. So, he stated that under no circumstances circumstances would she sleep in his bed, as that was an unbreakable rule for an alchemist. His bed was absolutely forbidden for test subjects. But upon turning around, he saw the crazy girl already sleeping peacefully in his bed, which almost caused him a breakdown. Indignant, our hero pulled the disaster girl from the bed, yelled that his rule was law, and wondered who had given her permission to sleep there. Now, both seated, she on the edge of the bed and him on the floor with his arms crossed, they stared at each other. Our alchemist then reiterated that as a test subject, she was forbidden from getting into the bed, leaving her very shaken. Then he dictated the rules. She would sleep on the floor without moving, without making noise, and without trying to go to the bathroom to get the hairdryer. With that, Isao turned off the lights in the room. Finally, he thought he could sleep peacefully, but suddenly, his eyes snapped open and he realized that keeping the disaster girl in the room was still risky, fearing a nighttime rage attack. With that, he peeked over the blanket and found her sleeping peacefully on the cold floor. She seemed so peaceful sleeping that it made him think the chances of her causing trouble were low, finally deciding to go back to sleep. But soon he heard some noises and wondered what she was up to again. Soon he grumbled for her to stay quiet and sleep. With the silence returning, he calmed down again, until the noise started again, irritating him deeply. Furious, he sat up on the bed, shouting and asking why the hell she was acting like that in the middle of the night. He then saw her huddled on the floor, shivering with cold. She seemed extremely uncomfortable sleeping there. Seeing this, our hero became thoughtful. He then went to Cheese's room and found him sleeping soundly, drooling on top of an adult magazine, which made Isao pick up the magazine with disgust, grumbling about how deplorable his lackey is. Then he tried to wake the rat by slapping his face a few times, but the rat just scratched his face and turned to his side, making Isao complain that he was leaving him with all the problems. But soon our alchemist smiled maliciously, and picking up a stinky beetle from a drawer, he brought it close to Cheese's nose. Isao then intensified the stench even more with a little fire, which made the rat wake up immediately with the bad smell. Right after, he started vomiting rainbows into a small cauldron. Furious, he sprayed a spray on his own nose and asked what his problem was. But our hero retorted, saying that it was the rat who had thrown the calamity on top of him. Then Cheese protested indignantly and asked if our hero thought the idea of using a stinky beetle as revenge was fair, but our alchemist said he wasn't there for revenge, and that he only came to ask if the rat had an extra blanket, which made the rat smile maliciously. He realized at once that the blanket was for the beautiful lady sleeping in his room. With that, Cheese teased him, saying that despite the complaints, the little virgin was secretly taking care of her, but our hero denied it, saying that he needed to conduct physical and combat tests with her the next day and needed to keep his physical condition stable until he collected the data. The rat then asked why he was asking for a borrowed blanket, since Isao had 6 bed sets, but our alchemist retorted that that was impossible, because each set had a meticulously planned purpose, explaining that Mondays and Sundays were cyclical days, so he used the Ouroboros set, symbolizing infinite cycles. Tuesdays and Wednesdays were dedicated to alchemic research, so he used the alchemic symbols set to get into the mindset of swimming in a sea of alchemic knowledge. Thursday was for purifying the elixir of life, Azoth, so he used the purple solid set since the purified Azoth was purple, and more importantly, it was his mother's favorite color. Friday was for his favorite TV show, Criminal Art, so he used his officially licensed Jack of Hearts betting. But Cheese interrupted him, stating that he already knew that the Saturday set was to motivate him to create the ultimate bioweapon, the Disaster Girl, and Isao confirmed, explaining that therefore he didn't have an extra blanket for her, which made the rat simply call him crazy. But then Cheese questioned what the problem was if the Disaster Girl used the blanket with her own design. That impeccable logic left our hero speechless. Even so, our hero complained that technically she hadn't even passed the tests, and therefore didn't deserve the title of Disaster Girl. Impatiently, Cheese replied that he could call her whatever he wanted, but warned that he only had one blanket and wouldn't share it, thus ending the subject. Irritated, Isao grumbled, questioning why a rat would need a blanket. Then, he walked to the closet of his precious blankets, sighed, and opened the Saturday compartment. Soon he spread the blanket with the disaster girl design on the floor, announcing that it was a gift from his benevolent master and demanding that she treat it with care, no drooling, crumpling, or rolling it up like a tube. A short time later, the blonde slept peacefully on the floor, now with her own blanket. But Isao began to think that, for safety, he should perhaps put a riot control collar on her. Shaking his head afterwards, he complained that his brain was completely fried and began to finally close his eyes. Then, some time later, seeing that our protagonist had fallen asleep, the disaster girl got up silently and began to stare at Isao, sleeping in a terrifying way.